Well, I'm showing 8 a.m. We are recording and live, so why don't we go ahead and jump into it because we've got a packed agenda today. My name is Michael Althuser. I'm chair of the General Government Committee. We're now calling to order. It is 8 a.m. on Wednesday, June 14th. Our first item, as always, is roll call. I am present along with Councilmember Kathy and Councilmember Dahlhoff. And our first action item is approval of the meeting minutes from our meeting on May 10th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? All right. Motion by Councilmember Dahlhoff and seconded by Councilmember Kathy. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. That brings us to our substantive portion of the agenda. And our first item is the Palermo Trail briefing. Chuck, I think you're gonna walk us through that.
I am, and I hope it's substantive. I'm coming to you today asking for your approval and a recommendation to City Council to approve funding for really the future development of a trail system that goes through the Palermo neighborhood. That's behind Burger King and down to the Palermo neighborhood in Deschutes Valley. I have a couple of quick slides I want to show you so I can orient you and talk a little bit about the project, if I can share that. So Palermo Pocket Park, it's one of the city's oldest parks, and really it's just about 10,000 square feet of leftover land from the creation of the Palermo Wellfield, where much of the city's water system is. A very small pocket park. We don't build parks like this anymore. It's a small play toy and a basketball court and a little bit of grass. But it does back up to the bottom of the Palermo watershed. The trail has been envisioned for a long time. It's a trail that's existed in an informal sense for probably 30 years or more as just sort of a deer trail or a small path that people have created. But we also included it in the design of the Deschutes Valley Trail. So the trail that goes from Historical Park through the golf course and to Pioneer Park. You can see on this red circle here, this is where the Palermo Trail fits in. It's a spur to the Deschutes Valley Trail, and it will get people from the golf course, the Valley Athletic Club, and the Palermo neighborhood up to Capitol Boulevard. The trail itself that we're talking about, you can see it goes from at the top. It's right, the trailhead is right near the Linda Street, right behind Burger King and the coffee shop that's there. It weaves down through the woods and ends up at that pocket park that I had on slide number 1. And there's also a loop trail that goes through the woods and around it and back in. To orient you a little bit more, this is the Palermo Park. This is the Palermo neighborhood. The golf course, if you're familiar, holes 2, 3, and 4. The red line here is the future Deschutes Valley Trail, and you can see how the Palermo Trail ties in with that. It's really a pretty incredible site as you get down there, kind of like the golf course. It is right in the middle of some of the busiest parts of our city, but once you get 100 yards into the trees, it's like you're 100 miles away out in nature. Obviously, real natural setting, lots of trees, lots of shrubs and growth. There's a wetland down here that you can see in one of those slides that holds water between the well field and the golf course. And in talking to our water resources people and our park staff, there's just a whole bunch of different ideas we have for interpretation, signage, benches, and things that could go in this trail. So it's a great getaway right in the middle of the city. Budgetarily, our engineer's estimate is $451,030.50. Seemingly a simple project, but as you know, and as things go, once we get into it and we really do it with clearing and grubbing, and we put a good base in for the trail, we are going to have to put in some drainage. We have to deal with some wetland issues near the trail, and put in something that can survive a lot of use, can survive the growth of the natural areas, and something that's easy for us to maintain. Doing it right, doing it once, that's the cost. So this kind of serves a couple different projects for us and takes care of a couple different things. We want to continue to push the development of the Deschutes Valley Trail. This is part of that. It's an informal trail system now, and we have some occurrences of nefarious activity that happens there just because it's so overgrown, and it's a great place to hide. We've had some homelessness issues in the woods here. And our thought, and as we've seen in other cities, if we can open this up and create an attractive trail system, more people will use it. More traffic helps us lower the amount of activities that we're not interested in seeing. So we want to provide this to the public, get people to use it, and make it something that people will be proud of as part of Tumwater Parks. And that is really all I have. So if you have questions for me, I'd be happy to answer that.
I have a question.
Councilmember Kathy, looks like there's something on your mind.
There is. I was wondering what exactly the surface is, crushed surface, or what?
Yeah,
I
it's
see-
a crushed, a compacted crushed gravel surface.
So is that fine gravel, grayish looking stuff?
Correct, right. It's small gravel with sort of a sandy mix in it, so it compacts really well.
Leetta, do you have any questions or anything?
I like it. I've walked down there, just started down with some young people one time down in the Palermo area and walked. They were proud. It was like they were showing their secret path
Yeah.
to places and telling me where you're. That's when they discovered how tall I was. They said, you're gonna need to duck at this one place. Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Great. And Chuck, this is coming from park impact fees from that account.
It is. Much of the Deschutes Valley Trail is funded with park impact fees, and this will be part of that.
Okay. That sounds good. Are there any other questions from council members before we potentially take action? All right,
No.
well, I guess I would entertain a motion that we recommend that the council authorize the Palermo Trail project to be funded from our park impact fees account. If anyone would like to make a motion.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Kathy and seconded by Councilmember Dahlhoff. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you very
So-
much.
So will this go on our next council?
Yes, I believe it's June or the July, later in July, second meeting in July.
Yeah, our meeting this Tuesday is canceled, so I'd assume it's 2 weeks from then, whatever that date is. Right?
No,
Well,
yeah,
This be on consent, or will this be something Chuck gets to talk about? Or
I think the plan was consent, but if you'd like me to talk about it and show those slides to everyone, I'd be happy to do that.
I don't know what my colleagues here think.
I don't have a preference. I think maybe might make sense to me, once we sort of, this will go back Chuck, will this go back before council for acceptance of the final work? Like to sign off when it's done? Like, is there another sort of public bite at the apple to where we would be able to show pictures of this is what it looks like now?
I don't believe so. We could make
Okay.
that happen if you'd like to see the final product.
We could do like a brief work session thing of just, this is once it's completed, and then show pictures and things like that.
Sure.
How does that sound to other
Well,
folks.
when is that anticipated to be? Chuck, do you have any idea when it would?
Oh, completion date would be late fall this year, October, November.
I just think it'd be great for all the council to see it and for, for it to be in a council meeting and people seeing what we're doing with our trails and parks and environment and all of that. So somewhere along the line.
I'm okay with it being on for council consideration instead of consent agenda.
It looks like we only have 2 items on our June 27th meeting. So we could just do it for consideration then. It doesn't look like the agenda is overly burdened or anything at the moment. Watch I say that and then like a dozen things
Jinx
hop on
it.
there in the next couple days. But all right, why don't we do that? We'll have it on for consideration on the June 27th meeting.
Great.
If that sounds okay.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right, well, moving on, our next agenda item is a briefing about our city's multifamily tax exemption program. Brad, I think you're going to help us walk through this discussion item.
Yeah, and actually we'll combine both this and the manufactured home park discussion in the same presentation, and we can do parts of that discussion as well.
Sounds great.
So at the request of the city council, there had been a request that staff would prepare a summary of where we are with the multifamily tax exemption program. And also we wanted to talk about what the city's actions have been to support manufactured home park preservation in the context of our affordable housing actions. This is also useful because the discussion of these items will also help inform the development of our 2025 comprehensive plan update. We'll touch on that as we move through this. Again, if you have any questions as we do this, if you want to ask questions, interrupt, that's fine. First of all, I want to just briefly touch on the policy background and the regional context for these issues, then delve into the specific issues themselves, as well as their connection to the tenant protections the council just approved. Talk a little bit about some related actions, and also touch again, as I mentioned, on the update. Again, we always start this discussion, but it's always a great place to start because I think this is just shows where the council is on housing and everything related to it and how important it is. In 2018, you passed a resolution that laid out specific actions to deal with homelessness, affordable housing, and how do we coordinate on regional issues. And from that, we've done a lot of work in developing housing affordability work plans, and every subsequent thing that we're working on is related in some way to this resolution. At the same time, we also established and worked on a new regional approach to dealing with homelessness and affordable housing through the Regional Housing Council. Again, their primary purpose is to promote equitable access to safe and affordable housing, considering policies and funding on a regional level to deal with these issues. I think this is important because there are a lot of those things that we identified in the resolution and our housing action plan that are things that would be probably better, more effective if we do it on a regional level. And I think we can talk about how that relates to the specific issues we're going to be talking about today. In 2021, the council approved the housing action plan, which contains a laundry list of actions for increasing and maintaining housing in the city, protecting what we have, as well as adding more as we do that. The important part of this is equity, again, was an overarching lens for how we did this. And also, it's really comprehensive, I think, in all the things that, laying out all the things that we should be working on. And we keep revisiting this as we're developing further actions and work programs. Specifically on the multifamily tax exemption program, just a little bit of background of what it is, and then we can get into some details of the city's program itself. The multifamily tax exemption program exempts property taxes on improvements made for multifamily development within designated areas of the city. The ordinance refers to those as targeted areas. The exemptions that are currently laid out in our code can either be 8 years with market rate housing only, or 12 years if at least 20% of those units are provided for affordable housing. That's affordable for the range from 80% to 115% of AMI. The tax exemption only applies to new housing improvement portion of the property taxes. The intention of the program in 2017, when the council adopted it, was to provide a catalyst to promote development overall within the targeted areas. It's intended to encourage residential opportunities as well. So there's two components. One, economic development, meaning that we add more housing, more people in particular locations like the Brewery District or the Capitol Corridor. That in turn will stimulate demand for commercial and offices and everything else. And then in 2019, the council expanded the program to the Little Rock and Town Center areas. And specifically in those cases, building on the 2018 resolution, the focus was entirely on creating more housing. So two different goals doing that. Again, it also really is looking to, as I mentioned, stimulate new construction and rehabilitation of existing vacant and underutilized buildings for multifamily housing. It gets us to the residential densities that we need to support retail and other services. And more importantly, in addition, it also is very helpful in making sure that we maintain our existing transit use and also potentially expanding those uses with having more people in those areas. Well, I think we've touched on a lot of these things. Also, it's important on the development side because it reduces cost for development, which increases the likelihood that we will see these kinds of projects occur in these areas. We obviously need to have additional information, probably a little market research to determine how much of a benefit this has been, whether or not these projects would occur with or without this program. But it is clear that this has been an important part of stimulating particular projects. It also is tied to the property itself. So a particular owner who develops a property has the benefit as long as they own the property. When they sell the property, that benefit remains with the property. As I mentioned, the council established the program in 2017 to stimulate economic development and redevelopment in the Brewery District and the Capitol Boulevard Corridor. Each of those sub-area plans that the council adopted in 2014 pointed to the need for a variety of financial incentives to see the kind of redevelopment that envisioned in the plans. And by redevelopment, I mean everything else that the plan wanted to do, from the commercial, the office, to the restaurants, the transit improvements, everything else was part and parcel of that project, and that it needed a kickstart. And the multifamily tax exemption program was one of those things that was envisioned as a way to sort of kickstart development in those areas. As I mentioned, the 2017 ordinance only had two targeted areas. Those areas that you see that are highlighted are the specific areas where a multifamily tax exemption program project could occur. And then the 2019 amendments, as I mentioned, are tied into the resolution of 2018 to just, we wanted more housing, period. And so with that in mind, we looked at the program as another way to provide those just housing opportunities. And we wanted to, and the council especially wanted to make sure that some percentage of the housing created through this program in those areas was going to be affordable for a portion of the AMI. So we have the two different areas that are indicated here. One is Little Rock and the other one is the Town Center. And also, just as a reminder, when the Planning Commission was discussing this, they had come in with an initial recommendation of 30% affordable housing as part of the program. The council wanted to see at the time whether or not the program actually would work, meaning that people would actually take advantage of the program. So they lowered that to the state minimum of 20% affordable housing, but it does point to the fact that we do have support for making other changes to the program as needed. A quick walkthrough of what it means to go through this particular process. There's two parts to it. One is a conditional approval and one is a final approval. As part of the development application, an applicant will file a conditional certificate application with the city. If it meets the requirements of the code, our development director will approve the conditional certificate. And then as part of that certificate process, there is a need to enter a contract with the city, and that is subject to approval by the city council. Once an approved conditional certificate and contract are in place, they're valid for 3 years from date of approval. There is the ability to extend those if there are extenuating circumstances, but there needs to be a fairly fast turnaround in terms of getting the housing on the ground. Once all the improvements are done in the project and once the city issues a certificate of occupancy, the applicant will file for a final certificate, which again will be reviewed and approved administratively by the Community Development Department. And then that starts the process of the exemption and everything else through the county assessor. To date, we have had a total of 4 different projects. And out of those, there are some that are in conditional side and some have been finalized. On the conditional side, it equals about 300 units. Of those units, 263 are market rate, and then 37 are in that affordable range. We've also had some that have been finalized, and those units are 141 total, with 121 market rate and 29 affordable units. Now, these numbers are actually comparable and not too shy of what the city of Olympia has in the past 3 or 4 years. So in terms of our program, we've been producing a good deal of units through this program. This is just a breakdown of where the units are located. Again, 119 of those units are using the 8-year option in the Brewery District, and they're all market rate. And then there are 2 projects in the Little Rock sub-area that are using the 20% affordable side of it. So some next steps and things that the council should be considering. Our program will expire in 2026. There's actually an expiry date in the regulations themselves that basically we need to evaluate and decide whether to continue with the program or not at that time. The state has been very active in amending and updating the RCWs that support this program. And so we have far more options now than we had in 2017 and 2019 to change and update the program if we think it's something we want to keep. As part of that process, the city may adopt and implement more stringent income eligibility requirements, meaning that the units that are affordable will be affordable to a range below 80% of AMI. There could be limits placed on the percentage of for a higher percentage of housing units. So instead of 20%, it could potentially go all the way up to 100%. Each of those options, if that is something the council wants to explore, I would recommend doing something very similar to what the city of Olympia did with their multifamily tax exemption program, which was basically have a consultant come in, evaluate how it was working with the specific market conditions that exist in the city of Olympia, and then lay out, if these options are chosen, how likely would the market decide that this is something that they would be incentivized enough to actually pursue. There's an important point that we can establish some requirements, but if the private market isn't thinking that it's going to be something that they could make work, it won't happen. So we need to keep that in mind as we're evaluating those kinds of things. From the staff perspective, we think the program is functioning as intended. We're definitely getting the housing units that we had hoped for. In fact, we're getting more than I anticipated, and especially more in the Little Rock area that I was anticipating. And as I mentioned, this would be something, if the council thought that they wanted to pursue different options as part of this, it would be something I think we would need to budget for. And also it's something we can consider as part of our amendments for the 2024 work program, and it's also as part of our comprehensive plan update process. An important point, if you're looking at what the city of Olympia did in terms of the study and the discussions they've been having, some important qualifications to how that could apply to what we have. Their study indicated that all the housing that they were getting in their downtown core was pretty much, if their multifamily tax exemption program was not in place, as well as some parking reductions that they did, those projects would not have happened. Now, two very important caveats to that. Number one, it's downtown Olympia, meaning that the property prices are much higher than what we have here. So that's hurdle number one. And number two, construction is different there than here. They have to basically do pilings for all their buildings, which increases construction costs considerably. So just be aware that we can't translate necessarily what they have found to what our situation is. Based on all the information I just dumped on you, do you have any questions or thoughts?
Brad, I'd like for you to go back, and we have had and review what it is that we have done. What projects are these specifically?
Okay.
And we only have one 12-year program, correct?
We have, well, each of the first, there are two parts to that. One, each of the target areas have the option to do a 12-year.
Right.
So if we have a project that comes in any of those 4 targeted areas, they can do a 12-year. We have had to date 2 12-year options in the Little Rock sub area. One is the Rockwell Place, which has been finalized, meaning that they're occupied now, and we're reporting to the state on affordability and everything. And then we have the Rockwell Place apartments, which are currently under construction, that have gotten conditional certificate approval. So those 322 units are divided into 2 different projects. In the Brewery District, for the 8-year option, we've had 2 different projects. One is on North Street Apartments, which I think if you've driven by there recently, you notice they're almost done with the exterior construction. I'm hoping that they'll be done this year with everything else. And then the Craft District Apartments, which are located just south of the new buildings that have been put up for the Craft District on Capitol Boulevard. So we've had 4 different multifamily tax projects come through.
So the two 8-year, the second one, the one on North Street, and the other one is where?
Is on Capitol Boulevard, immediately south of the Craft District, where the new building is going up for the market building, and then also where the campus is for the brewing center.
So that there's no work being done on that, correct?
That is in approvals for review and approval for the city right now. I think we're pretty close to issuing permits if we have not done so already. Mike may have some information on that.
That's the one that we heard at our recent council meeting, that it's kind of on pause for the moment due to financing on the development side.
Yeah, that's right.
And those 2, the council approved earlier, well, either late last year or earlier this year. So they have, again, 3 years to complete the project before they need to get a final for those. So that's unfortunately not unusual that we have some financing issues at times.
Mhm.
And that's, so we've conditionally approved that one. So even with conditional approval, they're still running into financing issues,
Mhm.
even with this tax exemption potentially on the books, which is not an insignificant benefit for a developer.
No.
Right.
Which one you're talking about, Michael?
The one on the one you asked about, that's just south of where the Craft District is.
Oh.
That we talked about the other day. I can't remember if it was I think it was a work session that we talked about no, it was during the council meeting when we were voting on the latest amendment to the Craft District agreement.
Well, I of course have spoken out, not always in favor of this program. I think we're kidding ourselves thinking that we are creating low-income housing. So We may be putting some people in market rate apartments. But first of all, I was at least a 30% person back when, not 20. And basically even with that, these are more middle class prices for this. So and the one on North Street, there's no low income, median income thing. That's all market rate. And that project's been planned for years by the Bershauer family. So, I guess one of the things I say, and it's, and I know there are programs like this all across the country, and they've been abused many times over, is the line also that we have there in our material that says the city's still going to collect the same property rate. We're not losing any money because we're spreading it out and other people are paying for it. So what this does is it keeps raising other people's taxes to cover this. And and then that hurts the rental market, because that's the thing that landlords use to keep raising your rent. And so I feel like we're caught in something here. We want to stimulate growth. I hate the fact we have to pay people to come and build in our city, that and these tax exemptions are, as soon as they're 8 years or 12 years or whatever runs out. Well, of course, the 8-year people can raise it any time, but these are not low or median income for perpetuity. They're for the length of the thing. So I just think we need to rethink this, because we're putting these tax exemptions on the backs of the people of Tumwater, and their taxes go up. And so the people who own property raise the rent to meet their tax bill. And to give this kind of thing, I know it's not giving it away, but to say that we're creating more market rate housing mostly. And I just think we need to think about this all the way through.
Yeah, well, I have a couple thoughts on your comments and just kind of on the program generally. I think that I definitely agree that, when taxes go up, that, a landlord who wants to make sure that their income stream is whole will probably raise rents. Like, I think that is kind of a given. I also at the same time know that, when the market is so constrained that it's difficult to find housing, that just supply and demand economics also then results in rent being increased. So I think that the challenge before us is really, where do we strike the balance between understanding that there are finite resources, that someone could build somewhere, that it might not be economically feasible to build in a certain place, and that when we do want density in certain areas like the Brewery Corridor, especially for reasons of, density is a really important thing for the environment too, because we're preventing sprawl in more rural areas and taking over and redeveloping farmland and things like that. So I also think that some of the changes the legislature has done, like we last passed an update to this 4 years ago, and one of the changes that the legislature has done that I think you might be interested in, Joan, is instead of 8 and 12, there's also a new version where if you have a 20-year exemption, then you can require that those units be permanently affordable by offering a 20-year. So even after that 20 years runs, then those units still have to be at that subsidized lower amount. The legislature, I think, also made changes so that we have more flexibility in defining what is an affordable unit, like maybe 80 to 115 AMI, which I think is our current threshold or range. Maybe that isn't what should be the unit. But to Brad's point in the briefing, I am not a real estate expert. I don't pretend to be. And it does make sense to me that, maybe this is something where we should get a consultant to help us think through these issues so that we can determine, like, okay, we had 2 projects go in the Brewery District and the Capital Corridor in total so far. There's 2 conditional approvals, one of which is already built. Let's assess, would those projects have happened otherwise? Seems probably not for the Capital Corridor one, because even with it, they're having trouble penciling it out. But, North Street, maybe that's an open question. Maybe we can look at it further. And then maybe that assessment can also look at, like, maybe it shouldn't be 80 to 115. Maybe it should be 60 to 100, or maybe it should be something else. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me, so that we can be more thoughtful about it, because to a certain degree, and we had this conversation in 2019 and 2017. To a certain degree, we're sort of guessing where that middle ground is. We're sort of guessing at, like, this is what we think we need to do, just based on our knowledge of the community, based on the lack of development that's already happened. So having some scientific expertise sort of look at our city, look at where we are, and look at where we want to be, that process makes a lot of sense to me, especially with the comp plan amendments coming in 2024. But so I guess I'm interested in folks' thoughts on that idea, if it makes sense to get some advice on ways we should change the program to improve it.
So do we even know, as we've gone through this, how constrained apartments are? That's what they're building, multifamily. Are mainly to capacity, because to rent an apartment today is,
You mean the vacancy rate?
yeah,
Yeah, I think as of 2 months ago, we were at like 2.4.
Mhm.
I think that's the most recent number I recall, which you really want to be around what, Brad, 5
Yeah.
in
we're
order
at-
to stop rents from increasing. And anytime you're below 5, just the supply of market and demand will just, you can afford to raise the rents a lot, which, that's the challenge. There just isn't places to rent. I mean,
Yeah.
under our comp plan, we need to add, like, what do we predict? We need to add 5,000 to 7,000 units over the next 10 to 15 years.
Mhm.
That's enormous.
Yeah.
The challenge before us is not small. It's enormous. And we also have a duty to manage that growth in the smartest and greenest way possible, which means density. But yeah, we need units of all types.
Yeah, and the important thing is, number one, the overall housing supply, we need just housing, period. Doesn't matter whether what's being built is necessarily affordable to people entering the market. The important part of that is it's adding more units, so the units that are at the bottom of the market become available to those who currently can't access them. So what's being built necessarily isn't for the affordable side. It's just there to create more flexibility in the market, to create more vacancy in the market. So it holds the overall market down. And then the second component, of course, is if there's specific need for affordable housing for particular income groups, that's another component of that. But those are 2 very important parts to it.
so building affordable housing is not the main thing. It's just getting units out there for the,
Yeah. The
Or the-
issue is, yeah, if we don't have an overall high supply of housing, we're constrained and our vacancy rate is so low, all the efforts that we're going through to try to get people into housing that need it, that maybe can't afford it on the market rate, makes it much more difficult. So we need to be pursuing both of those options.
The other thing that I think is interesting also and beneficial about the 12-year that does have affordable units is, Joan, I think you're totally right that 80 to 115% of AMI, you're reaching into the middle class there, or maybe you used to be,
Totally.
but as opposed to low income units, I think you're totally right about that. I think that the other benefit of that, that's not low income housing. It just isn't. If you are living on a social security check, you can't afford that rent. You just can't. But we have in Washington state a legislative ban on rent control, not allowed to do that at all. And this is when you have an incentive to where a developer sort of agrees to keep rent stable, like that's kind of the closest you can get to rent stabilization over a somewhat prolonged period of time. And 8 years isn't forever, it goes by in a heartbeat. I can't believe I've almost been on council for 8 years. It's wild. But that also in terms of affordability is like stability is also an important component of affordability, and requiring that the rents be tied to a percentage of area median income that prevents these 10, 15, 20% increases that folks see that hit particularly hard because it's tied to a given figure that is more modest. Doesn't mean there can't be rent increases if it's tied to area
But
median
still
income, but
increase the rent. They still can increase the rent. So, I mean, there's no, even in under the, quote, affordable median income, they can, that rent isn't going to stay the same for 12 years.
no, but it's not going to jump by 15 or 20% because the population that's renting it only makes so much money. So if you try to gouge people, you're just going to have a vacant unit. And that's like the worst outcome for a property owner or a landlord. They're not going to take that loss. They need someone in the unit, even if it's $50 less than what they would otherwise charge. That's the only point I was making. Leah, I
So-
saw you had a hand up though. Don't want to hog the mic.
Yeah, when I had my comments now, it doesn't really fit, but it's fine. So listening to you both, agree with all of it. And I've just been trying to grasp all the stories we see in here, right? And then I'm just imagining like a basket and I need multiple items in that basket. So these elements fit one demographic of our community, and that doesn't take away from the need of other demographics, right? So I want multiple solutions because not one solution will fit everyone, right? Just like today, we're going to still talk about manufactured home parks, right? And those needs. And then I think about people who are downsizing or a change in life, right? Or can't manage, right? All those different elements. And so I appreciate this opportunity, and I would support a consultant or someone coming in and doing a little deeper dive, pardon me, on the data, right? I would like to have that option of the 20-year and things in perpetuity, right? Along with 8 and 12 in the Brewery District, right? Because I want to infill and meet the Growth Management Act options, right? And I want that to become our downtown, right? So all those elements play into each other. And then I think about, besides just apartments, I would like to see options where we can have home ownership, like the Habitat for Humanity option. So people can build equity and pass on that wealth to the next generation, right? So I feel like this is a great starting point. I support a consultant coming in, and I also want to see the other options for increased ownership so they can build equity, because that just transforms lives and changes trajectories. So I'd like to see, as we build, to have the ownership of condos, townhouses, and other middle housing options as well. Thank you.
I just am disturbed by the fact that we are giving these options with, waiving property taxes and someone else is picking them up. I mean, I have a little trouble with that when someone asks me. And also, I'm a renter, and I can vouch for the fact that as we do this, my landlady's watching every single bit of it. And last year, in 1 year, she raised my rent $300. And so people like me on the other end, this impacts the fact that we are giving property tax exemptions and saying that the city uses property tax for our city operations, and we will still collect the same amount. That's what it says on the page. And to do that, somebody else has to pick that up. And I think we need to think about that long and hard some way. I don't know what way. And I'm not just talking for myself. I'm answering these, trying to answer some of these questions every time this comes up to others and to some of the folks that Leetta is talking about. So, I'm probably less against this in some areas of it. I would like to see us increase to at least 30% and that kind of thing. But I'm concerned about other homeowners, other people in this city, and I don't think it should be put on the backs of them that way. And some of those are first-time people trying to make it, or some of these middle income, low income, lower income people that we're trying to catch with this
Yeah.
program.
Yeah,
So-
I think part of the theory for why you offer a tax exemption in certain areas is that by spurring redevelopment, like let's say hypothetically that when the population base grows, then a developer looks at a project in the Capital Corridor or the Brewery District and they say, you know what, there's a lot of people living here, this is now viable. And then they build a business that generates sales tax revenue, or put in a restaurant that generates sales tax or liquor tax or whatever. That by upfronting sort of this piece, and then you increase your tax base by spurring development and having a stronger business core, then your overall tax base has sustained a net increase to where someone's net, their day-to-day would not actually be impacted. I think that's the theory behind this. It's all kind of theoretical, and that I don't know if you could quantify that, but it would be something that I would want to get information from the consultant about, because that is sort of the goal of those things in those particular areas. Is we want to redevelop the brewery, right? And if we do that, we'll be a far more prosperous city in all sorts of ways, not just about taxes, but about livability and walkability and urbanism and all sorts of positive attributes. So some of this is a challenge because it's hard to quantify, I think, but having a consultant to work with, I think, would be helpful. We're gonna have to pay for that. I'm not sure how we would do that considering we're in the middle of the budget, but maybe that's something we can discuss and then talk about, what we could reasonably expect to pay for that. We are getting a little bit of revenue from our landlord registration program. I'm not sure if that's already dialed to use for mediation or for other things, but there is a tangible nexus between the people who pay into that fund, who might also be the people potentially accessing a tax exemption. So there is a policy nexus there in terms of potentially dialing in those dollars for that. But we are 48 after and have a couple more items to get to, and I really want to make sure we have time to have a thorough discussion about the manufactured home park preservation. So if there aren't any burning questions, it sounds like that would be talking to a consultant, something that I think we all seem interested. We'll have to talk to the mayor about that too, obviously, but if there aren't any burning questions, I'd like to move along to the next item, if that's okay with folks.
Okay. Moving through, the last remaining slides here are in your packet, but I would recommend you take a look at them. This just outlines a lot of the things that you've been talking about other next steps and additional items you can consider. Moving on to manufactured home parks, this has been a city goal and a stated goal since 2018, since the resolution was passed by the council. Really, the importance of manufactured home park preservation is multiple. Obviously, it supports our housing affordability goals because it's an important source for low income and cost burden households for housing. It's maintaining our existing housing stock. There's close to 1,000 units of manufactured housing in the city. A good portion of those are in these manufactured home parks. And again, it gets at the whole idea of increasing household wealth by providing a safe and stable option for rental housing and other pathways for home ownership. We had started this before, obviously, when the council approved the manufactured home park zone district, which was probably a very blunt instrument to basically preserve existing manufactured home parks from conversion to other uses. These zone districts basically said you can do the home parks or you can do some very limited other options. This withstood legal challenges. And it's probably number one in terms of the protections that we have for the parks. What it doesn't necessarily get at is obviously how rents for the pads for the manufactured home units themselves are addressed. So it's sort of the first part, but doesn't address everything. As part of the 2018 resolution, council asked that we assess actions for assuring mobile home parks continue to provide affordable housing with, again, that goal of property ownership by residents. With that particular goal in mind, we've been having ongoing discussions with local land trusts and other local nonprofits about possibilities for working with existing owners of the parks and the tenants to see if there's some mechanism for the tenants to purchase those parks. So the important part about that is that if the tenants control the land, they have a much better possibility of controlling the overall prices of what the rents are. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to keep the rents exactly where they are, because you're going to have ongoing maintenance and other things that you're going to have to attend to. But it's another important part of sort of holding the costs down. We incorporated that into the housing action plan. Really, as part of our increasing supply of permanent income restricted affordable housing, we've asked to explore options for establishing a program to preserve and maintain healthy and viable manufactured home parks. So that is definitely a policy goal that continues to this day. Related to that, and this is an important thing to keep in mind, is all of the rental housing protections that the council passed in Title V earlier this year and late last year, and the dispute resolution services related to those protections also apply to rentals in manufactured home parks. So all of those things are directly connected. The issue, I think, on our side, for regulatory side, is while we have the ability to regulate the conversion of the parks to some other use, meaning that we lose those altogether, we don't have the authority to limit rents. As Michael spoke to earlier when we were talking about we don't have rent control in the state, it's not allowed. We don't have that regulatory authority to try to deal with that. We do have, however, the ability to educate and support actions that allow tenants to work together and worked with the home park owners to manage those costs and encourage those things. So it's more of an education and a other thing that we're looking at. Some things that we definitely can explore, and we've outlined already in the housing action plan. We can explore additional programs for maintaining and repairing individual manufactured homes. We could fund to replace housing units that would be better replaced than repaired. We also can consider funding for relocation for those parks that cannot be preserved. So there are some manufactured home parks in the city that aren't under our current zone districts. So those are always at a threat to be converted. Or we could also continue to work with land trusts and other entities to purchasing parks outright.
Brad, can I ask you a question on this slide?
Mm-hmm.
So you've been in contact with some of the constituents who've reached out to council. Is that one, when I looked it up, I think that one was in a district that can't be converted. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So it wouldn't be on this list of ones that could potentially be added to that.
No, but there are probably 2 or 3 large ones that I'm aware of. One, I think that we just recently annexed, that aren't currently as part of that zone district.
Okay, thanks.
Other things that I know we're currently working with manufactured home park owners are making service and utility upgrades. The manufactured home park just off of Little Rock on 70th, we're working with them on sewer and water improvements. Converting that from septic to sewer and well to water is also a very important thing in terms of keeping costs down. We can help with that. And then on the state legislative side, I think this is probably where the Regional Housing Council and other cooperation with other entities is very important, because I know the city of Lacey is having similar discussions right now that we're having in terms of what they want to do and laying out the options for their council and all these things that we're just talking about. I think if there's any opportunity that we can work cooperatively, that makes a lot more sense. It saves costs, it's much more efficient, and all of that. So I think we have other things that are going on that we can definitely try to tap into. There's also some, I think the legislature considers some amendments that didn't go through this year. But again, the legislature seems to be very open to pushing things related to housing. I think that will continue. I think that's still an option for us to consider. And then finally, for the next steps that we outlined already in our housing action plan, we said we wanted to implement the action that I spoke of for protections. What we have not done so is actually provide funding for that. The funding would go towards staff and other things that needed to develop and run the program. That is also something I think the council should consider as part of any budget amendment discussions that they may have. And it's something we could definitely add to our 2024 work program. I think that, and then lastly, on the rental housing side, we've talked a little bit about that already, but so I think that lays out what I had prepared for today for the manufactured home parks. But if there's any questions or discussion, I think this is probably a good time.
Councilmember Taha.
Thanks, Michael. So, right, again, with like looking at options like long-term and short-term, right? So I appreciate the long-term. And then what does a timeline look for short-term for the 2 manufactured home parks that are coordinating with Dispute Resolution Center, which I appreciate, right? And that timing when tenants are being given contracts that they have to sign now for $100 increase or $380 increase, right? The email from Kyle Taylor Lucas that we all got, right? So what does the short term look like? And we can't do rent control, but what does rent stabilization? So in your slides, like I would love to see like a permanent line item in our budget for Rebuilding Together Thurston County or another nonprofit that provides like services to do repairs, right? Because what we're seeing is manufactured home parks that did those repairs now are no longer providing that. The one around the corner from me down the road saying now if you can't repair your carport or your steps, we're going to remove them. When before it was all covered, right? So what does that look like to stabilize the rent? Food insecurity, benefits being decreased. So we partnered 2 examples with the Little Free Pantry concept, right? Eileen and I are going to volunteer with a food bank to sign up to get food for seniors where they just message us and say, yes, we can get food for them, right? That's fine, but that's just a couple of us, right? There's more and more and more. And so there's contacts we haven't made. So I understand the education piece, but I go back to the example of Linda in one of the parks saying, you can give me all the notice you want. If I don't have the money, I don't have the money. And I want to live there because that's my home, right? So what do we do in the short term, right? I've met with a couple of our seniors in our community, and you can physically feel the fear, right? And it goes back to Joan, like $300 in a year. So like, how do I look someone in the face who has said that they will commit suicide before they become homeless? and they're in their 70s. How do I answer that? Like, what do we do short term for our community members who are desperate and scared?
So thank you, Leah, and thank you for your outreach to the community too, and sort of acting as a liaison so we can sort of hear those stories. We also have, open doors and happy to meet with anyone who is experiencing those things. I'm not sure that your questions have, so some of your questions are rhetorical, like I'm not sure that I have the answers to your questions, right?
Right.
So certainly, I don't think we are asking staff for how to answer those things. I think that's incumbent upon us to try to come to the table with solutions. And for the short term, the only thing that I can sort of think of would be either like a grant program, or, we do have, like, the notice periods do not solve the problem. I wonder if you could have is it technically rent control if you require like a 12-month notice for rent, or like an 18-month notice for rent increase? Not on paper, but you know that maybe there's clever ways we can sort of look at our language to see if, like, if you're going to do a rent increase, that you have to provide a significant, incredible amount of notice beyond 90 days. But I wish I had the answer to your question. Maybe that means really that sounds like rent assistance. Like, under the law, the landlords have the abilities to raise rent, right? We can't preclude them from doing that legally. We can assist tenants in a variety of ways by creating programs and creating grants and things like that. Maybe that's what that is.
Right. And what does it look like if manufactured home parks that provided maintenance services and utilities, and then now are pulling back the things that they have always covered, and our seniors don't have that income to now pay for what had been covered? What does that look like, right? Like, does that look like reviewing our utility services, like assistance program? And how do we make those touch points when there's also an element of embarrassment and shame of asking for help?
Yeah, I mean, I think to that, we do have a utility assistance program that has a healthy balance in it that I think is underutilized, probably because people aren't aware of it, and then two, because of your last point, that people don't want to receive a quote unquote handout, right? But that these programs exist to help people, and there's, it's challenging to be in the situation where for the first time in your life as a senior, you have to apply for help, right? When you've never done that before. I totally understand the challenge of that. But given the circumstance, that's why that program exists. Maybe there's other ways we can make it more accessible. But you raise a lot of questions that, I mean, I certainly don't have the answers to, that, those are the challenges, right? Joan, looks like you're about to say something.
I think that the program that helps people with their utilities and that kind of thing, the city turned it over to
It's Community Action Council.
Community Action Council, and I feel like it's underutilized because of that. And I feel like as a senior, I would ask my city more than I would go to Community Action Council and have to fill out all of the different things. There's someone who used to use it, I know, I've talked to, that when it was with the city, this is their city, they feel like, quote, we'll take care of them. I think we need to look at that program, and maybe, and we not got rid of it, but moved it because of, staffing it here. But I think we should consider home and letting people know they can, give to it or something, because it is underutilized and it's there. So it would be something we could use for utilities. Just a thought.
I mean, when Joan's point spot on. When Kirsten York with Community Action Council came and talked about it, she said that the process was onerous, she thought, and so they were using other funds like PSC funds because it was easier to distribute that than our process. And I was like, why didn't you tell us this earlier? How could we streamline this process? And we never circled back to why she wasn't distributing our funds. What were the challenges or hurdles that we were creating in our process? So I think that's something that's been, that hasn't really been addressed.
Was she saying that it was because of the rules and regs that we put on it?
That's what it sounded like, but I thought our process was pretty streamlined. So we never circled back to that of why was it easier to give other funds than our funds?
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, that's certainly an actionable item we can look into in the short term. I guess I'm also curious if folks are interested in, one of the things on your slides, Brad, that really stuck out to me was just that we now have some mobile home parks in the city, including one that was recently annexed that is not covered by our protection ordinances. That sort of strikes me as potentially a pretty high priority for trying to grandfather those properties in so that they have the same coverage as other mobile home parks in the city. Especially just given how swift redevelopment of those parcels can be if it's in a high demand area. That really rises to the top of my list as something we should do. That obviously doesn't address the constituents who've reached out to us directly, right? Those are different places, but we should really make sure that those are grandfathered in under our existing structures and ordinances.
How do we do it? How does it happen?
It's-
Create an ordinance.
It's a comprehensive plan amendment and a rezone. So it would be part of probably part of our update, but it's definitely something that we can fold in as part of that process.
Oh, I know that there's no rent, quote, rent control in Washington, but one of my friends, his daughter lived and worked in Seattle for a number of years and had like it was a rent controlled apartment. I mean, what everyone else, I mean, is there certain things that different cities do that people qualify for?
She on Section 8 potentially? Like
Maybe
there's certain voucher programs where the rent has to be basically 30% of an individual's income or less. Like Section 8 is that way. If you receive a Section 8 voucher, the rent is sort of capped based on your income. I think the difference between that and other situations is like for Section 8, the landlord is agreeing to abide by those terms, right? It's not being foisted upon them. The rent control ban is essentially a different circumstance. Like a landlord could agree to not raise rent, and that's my hope certainly for the mediation outcome is that there's some kind of an accord or an agreement with the tenants. But telling a landlord, no, thou shalt not raise the rent is what the state says that cities can't do. We can always incentivize that, but we can't just tell them that they can't legally.
So in this case, possibly the city of Seattle had a way to incentivize that, have their own Section 8 program or type of thing? Or something?
Probably, yeah. It's either the city or that. I think housing authorities typically handle Section 8, but if a landlord agrees to take a Section 8 voucher, then they agree to certain rules as the privilege of accepting the voucher. So it sort of works like an incentive in that sense.
Do we have a percentage of people on that in this city?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could ask the housing authority how many, they would probably be able to know how many individual vouchers there are for Section 8 in the city. And we do have bans on discrimination against people who receive Section 8 or VASH vouchers or any other housing voucher. We ban source of income discrimination.
Are people who live in mobile home parks eligible for those?
I think so. I think I don't think it discriminates based on the unit. I think the challenge with Section 8 though is that, well, actually, I don't know because they own the unit, but not the land. So I don't know if I'm gonna take that back. I don't know if you could do that. If you're renting a mobile home, you could get a Section 8 voucher. I don't know if you could if you're owning it, because then the voucher would be paying for the land, not for the unit. You could, I think you could use a hen voucher to pay for the land, but I'm not certain on that either. We'd need to talk to probably a legal expert or the county to know that for certain.
I was just trying to think of, you know, what some of these solutions could be for these folks.
Like we could create as a city, we could create a program that people apply to. You know, again, Leah, I want to be conscious of the comment you made that is a challenge, that there's stigma associated with that. Like we could create a program where someone in a mobile home park could apply for assistance for their lot, right? We could do that. I think the challenge with that is that as a city, we've budgeted, I think the bucket for housing issues was like $100,000 over the span of 2 years. And we probably spent it in like 3 or 4 months. Like, I'm pretty sure that's already gone and that we already used it. So the challenge is just that we don't have a ton of funding in order to support these things. Doesn't mean we can't do it, but we're in the middle of the year in the budget. That's not an insignificant program, both in terms of staffing and managing who applies and sending the grants out, creating the program. Like if we're talking short-term solutions, I don't know how we can do that in the very short term unless we work with Community Action Council, or some other together, or some other, well, together works with kids. So maybe that works in some cases, but not all. But you would really need an entity on the outside in order to be willing to help do some of the legwork, because I don't know if we could stand that up on our own in the short term. And we would need the money for it. And we don't have really very much money budgeted left in the housing bucket.
Well, some of it, I guess, you know, the people who need it and some of the people that Leah has talked to are asking us, what are our priorities? You know, if we don't have money for, you know, these things, what, you know, I mean, they look around and say, well, you have money for this, you have money for that. You know, that's just typical what people do. So how come you can't help us out? So, yeah. Well, I really do think we should look at how people access our utility account and what some of the issues are, and if need be, we need to think about bringing it back and advertising or giving it away or doing whatever we need to do. We don't want to have people giving to something and have it sit there. That's for sure.
One of the questions I have for both of you is regarding, you both sit on the Regional Housing Council, right? You're developing new projects. Is there any items for keeping people in their homes? Is there a line item in the Regional Housing Council that identifies seniors or, right, or manufactured home parks? Could that be an element of the Regional Housing Council and part of those funds, right? Because we give our funds, right, however little they are. But what does that look like for the Regional Housing Council? Is it solely just for new development?
No, if you don't mind, I'll answer first. The important thing is the Regional Housing Council is going to be considering an actual work program going forward. And the work program is going to be able to draw from a lot of different sources, including our housing action plan, as well as the homeless services plan. We can definitely include preservation, you know, as of existing housing as part of that, because it is part of a housing action plan. it's really a decision now for the Regional Housing Council to make, to saying that this is something we think is important, that we think we should add to our existing portfolio of things we work on. It's definitely within the wheelhouse of what the Regional Housing Authority could do, council could do.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add is it's kind of a two-step process, and that the council sort of sets like the broad goals it wants to achieve, which could be preservation, like you're talking about. And then the community applies with ideas for how to achieve those goals, right? Like we set the goals, and then the RFP says, this is what we want to do. Tell us, your ideas for how to do it. And then, the lived experience committee and the steering committees evaluate the results from the RFP and then come up with a funding formula.
I mean,
So
we spend so much time being reactive. What does it look like to be proactive? Right. And so I feel like we just it's always a crisis, always something, right? So what does it look like to have this platform to go, all right, how do we keep people in their homes? What does that look like in addition to the housing crisis? Like, I feel like we should be able to do both.
We should, and there's money. We're going to be looking at it this afternoon, millions of dollars. And I think that I can remember over the years when it used to be called HHSC, and Virgil Clarkson was a constant voice for seniors. He just said, we need to make it a category, we need to make it something that we fund. We need to set this up. I can remember, him talking about that. And we do not have that in the Regional Housing Council. We don't have any kind of call out or emphasis or anything for seniors at this point.
Yeah.
And I think it's, well, I'm probably one of many on there who, if we really talked about it, would find that is something that we would.
That just
We-
blows my mind, right?
It do.
10,000 people a day turn like 65 in our country. Like, it is, I mean, I call it the silver tsunami. Like, we are not prepared for the needs of our aging population. So I don't know, like, what would it take to actually have that? I know there's representation. I think a couple people of the community representation, but like, I don't know, it gets frustrating sometimes because there's so many needs, right? There's so many demands.
Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
it. And yet still, this is our current state, right? So it's always a juggling act.
well, I think that is something we could bring up at the Regional Housing Council.
Absolutely.
Joan and I would be happy to do that. And Brad, you could raise it on the staff side with the technical team that's something we're interested in.
Yeah. I think there's more than enough policy support to say, and then the tech team has definitely had these kind of discussions. I share your frustration with dealing with enormous fires when smaller fires that are going to get bigger are just have to be put aside. So it's definitely something we could talk about.
We have one more agenda item to get to. I want to make sure we have time to get to it. I don't know how you transition from such a challenging
I
topic.
appreciate this
gracefully,
space to
but-
have this conversation. So thank you that we could have this, right? Like, it's never going to end, right? This is our job. This is what we do. We're always continuously improving, meeting needs, shifting. So I appreciate that we could talk about all the different elements and try to not have them siloed. So thank you.
We're all headed in the direction of this conversation personally. So we need to, or for some of you, your parents and so forth. So it's a need to not only have the discussion, but start moving in those directions. So I appreciate the conversation also.
A lot of work to do. That's for sure. Well, I think just given time, we have to transition to our next topic, which is the third grant amendment for the Bush Prairie Habitat Conservation Plan. Brad?
All right, so the last item for today, this is a request from staff that the General Government Committee review and schedule a grant amendment to our Phase 2 grant for the Habitat Conservation Plan to the July 18 City Council consent calendar with a recommendation for approval. The grant amendment is just extending the length of the grant again from a due date of 2023 to 2024. This is important because there are remaining funds as part of the Phase 2 grant that are intended to be allocated towards the environmental review process that is required for the Habitat Conservation Plan. They're not insignificant. They're something we would like to continue to do, and this amendment would allow us to be able to use those funds for that. I think that pretty much covers what the ask is from the staff.
Any questions? It's a relatively straightforward one.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, I with that, I guess, I mean, I don't have any questions either, so I would entertain a motion that we schedule the grant amendment number 3 for the July 18th, 2023 City Council consent calendar with a recommendation for approval.
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Dahlhoff, and it appeared to be seconded by Councilmember Kathy. You were muted, but I am a lip reader. With that, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. That was the final item for our agenda, and we are wrapped. So with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone. This is a really substantive meeting. Appreciate your attention, your thoughts.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.